Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and get started in just a few minutes. Hola, buenas tardes a todos. Gracias por acompañarnos hoy. Vamos a empezar en unos cuantos minutitos. Estamos esperando algunas cuantas otras personas y ya vamos a poder empezar. Y si podemos empezar, de hecho, con poner nuestro nombre, pronombre y organización y dónde estamos localizados en el chat para empezar a presentarnos, a introducirnos, a saber quién está aquí. If we can begin by writing your name, your pronouns, where you're based out of. If you're with an organization, write that out, just so we get to know a little bit about who's joining us today. I see people from all over. Veo a muchas personas de diferentes partes del país, ¿verdad? Aquí a Oklahoma, San Francisco, Carolina del Norte. I see people from all over, San Francisco, North Carolina, Oklahoma, New York, Chicago. Very exciting. Qué emocionante ver a todos aquí. Okay. Ok, para los que se están uniendo apenas, si pueden poner en el chat su nombre, pronombre, en dónde están basados y si están en una organización, si pueden compartir eso con nosotros. Thank you all those who are just joining. We're just introducing ourselves. If you can write out on the chat your name, your pronouns, where you're based out of, and if you're with an organization, if you can share that as well. Welcome, Yasmin, Selena, Daisy, Sebastián. Bienvenidos a todos, a todos. Sebastián, Daisy, Selena. Ok, pues mucho gusto verles aquí. Vamos a seguir. Vamos a empezar con lo que tenemos preparado hoy porque sí es hartita información. Entonces, si podemos seguir al siguiente slide, por favor. We're going to go ahead and get started because we do have a lot, very packed agenda. So we can start. We're going to start with an explanation on interpretation. We do have that available today. So I'll be passing it on to our interpreters. Vamos a empezar con una explicación sobre la interpretación porque sí tenemos eso disponible hoy. Entonces se lo voy a pasar a nuestro intérprete, José.
Buenas. Hi, my name is Jose Romero and I use they, them pronouns. And I'm joined today alongside Yaya, providing language justice in Spanish and English for your call today. Así que mi nombre es José Romero, uso los pronombres ella y les, y estoy unido hoy con Yaya, que uso los pronombres ella y ella, para poder brindar justicia de lenguaje a través de interpretación en inglés y en español hoy. To access the interpretation on today's call, through Zoom, if you're joining from a computer, what you're going to do is click the little globe that you see at the bottom of your screen, select the language in which you would like to participate, and hit done. If you're joining from a cell phone or a tablet, it's going to be a similar process, except look for 3 little dots that are going to be in the corner of your device. Select those 3 little dots, select interpretation of languages or language interpretation, and select the language in which you would like to listen and participate today. And remember to hit finalized or done there as well. Si se están uniendo a través de una computadora, lo que van a hacer es buscar un globo terráqueo que está al fondo de su pantalla. Pueden ver esto en la diapositiva que está en la pantalla ahorita. Después de que seleccionan ese globo terráqueo, van a seleccionar el lenguaje en cual les gustaría participar y escuchar hoy. Si se están uniendo a través de un celular o una tableta, va a ser un proceso similar, nomás que van a buscar esos 3 puntitos que están en una esquina por ahí, seleccionar esos tres puntitos, seleccionar donde dice interpretación de idiomas y seleccionar el lenguaje en cual les gustaría escuchar y participar hoy. Language justice is something that we do together. So just a gentle reminder to please speak one person at a time, take a breath between every sentence or every speaker if possible, and to speak one language at a time. That way we don't have to privilege any voice over the other. La justicia del lenguaje es algo que hacemos juntos. So nomás un recordatorio de por favor hablar lentamente, respirar entre cada frase o cada orador y hablar un lenguaje a la vez. Así no tenemos que privilegiar una voz más que la otra. We know there are many languages represented on the call today that are go beyond English and Spanish. So feel free to give a shout out in the chat. And thank you for flexing your language justice muscle today. Sabemos que hay muchos más lenguajes que el inglés y el español que representan ustedes. Así que si quieren dar un anuncio o destacar el lenguaje de ustedes que ustedes practican, pueden ponerlo ahí en la caja de charla y lo vamos a celebrar juntos. Y con eso que disfruten de su llamada. And I'll pass the mic back to the organizers. Thanks for having us. Y con eso, you're ready.
Thank you, Jose. So before we get started, I'm going to be launching a poll so that we get to know a little bit about why we're all joining here today. Let me go ahead and launch that. So you should be seeing a couple of questions in front of you right now. Just asking, a little background on if you've ever worked on a deportation defense campaign, as well as some of your feelings around the new DHS memo, how you're feeling about that. I see a couple of you filling it out. And then there's a question at the end on just to gauge what language you feel more comfortable speaking. We do have that interpretation available, but want to get an idea as well. Okay, answers are coming in. We're reaching about 50% participants. If you haven't answered it, I will give you a couple more minutes for that. Right now, it's looking pretty even on who's worked on a deportation campaign before, around 50-50. And it's anonymous. I won't see who's filling it out, so don't feel embarrassed to answer honestly. Just share a little bit about how you feel about the memo. We'll give it a couple more minutes. About 30 people haven't answered, but I'm going to be closing it another 5 seconds. Okay. I am gonna stop that now, and I will share the results just to get an idea. Again, around 50 people have worked, percent of our participants today from the people who answered have worked on a deportation defense campaign before. So again, there will be information that we learn. And then for some of us, it might be a refresher or kind of like a throwback to how things used to operate before. And then how do you feel about the new DHS memo? We are seeing that there's a lot of mixed feelings around this. So we'll go over maybe a little bit about why that may be for some of y'all. And then we do see that there's a lot of people who speak both languages. So we'll get into some breakout sessions later and also have that opportunity for both English and Spanish speakers to share some thoughts. So I'm going to stop this now and we're going to be going over the agenda. So this is the agenda for today. We will be talking a little bit about how we got here, specifically how we got to discussing the Pd Memo, the new enforcement memo that we are going to be focusing on today. We are going to be introducing our organizing toolkit, which is really exciting. And we worked with Just Futures Law to put this out. So that's going to be a resource for the community for organizers to use and take with you. We'll go over it a little bit. We'll go over the legal analysis that you'll find in the toolkit around the PD memo and some tools for how to organize around it. And then we'll get into the discussion that we're really looking forward to hearing from all of y'all on where we see opportunities to organize, what we see possible in the next few months with this memo specifically. And we'll end with a couple of next steps, just some information on why we're coming here today and what we hope to get out and to leave with when we're done. So that's our agenda for today, and we're gonna go ahead and get started with Chloe, who's going to be sharing a little context and background as to what got us here.
Hey y'all, my name is Chloe. I'm a Mi Gente member, and I helped write a good chunk of the toolkit, and I'm really excited to be talking to y'all today. But I just wanted to ask you all, why does the PD memo matter? Like, why is this important? What does it affect? Feel free to come off mute if you want to answer or throw it in the chat. What's impacted by the prosecutorial discretion memo that just came out? And don't be shy, like 50% of y'all have fought an anti-deportation case, so you know, but we just want to make sure that the other 50% know too. All right, so it talks about who is a priority for enforcement. Thank you, Ale. And yeah, I mean, basically this document alone, right, decides who is going to be considered a priority for being arrested, for being detained, for being deported, right? And so it's actually a really powerful document, right? It's basically the instructions to ICE agents, and every administration decides their own prosecutorial discretion policies, right? So this is coming straight from the Biden administration. This isn't something that Congress had to sign off on. Joe Manchin is not deciding this for Joe Biden. He alone has decided, like, these are going to be my policies. These are my instructions to ICE. And this is who's going to be arrested, detained, and deported under my administration. And I'm definitely going to try and slow down for interpretation. And just to read some of the stuff that's coming into the chat, Maru saying we can use it to free people who are detained. Shanat is saying it's supposed to guide internal enforcement. Alice saying for my case, I'm no longer priority and we can apply to close my case. That's amazing. Snaps and claps and everything for you know, Ale being able to close her case. So, you know, there are definitely certain things that are we're considering wins in this PD memo. And at the same time, we know that it's just a tool, right, that we can use to organize and get people free. So this is not the end all be all. If somebody gets what's called prosecutorial discretion, that doesn't mean that they actually have status in this country. That doesn't mean that they can stay here permanently and have stability and freedom like everyone deserves, right? That doesn't mean that they even have access to a work permit. And so it's really important to understand that too, that when we're talking about prosecutorial discretion, all we're talking about is that law enforcement agencies, and that includes ICE, have the power usually to determine how they're going to use their resources. And so they can decide, I'm actually not going to go after somebody who's jaywalking. We're not going to use our local police department's resources for that, right? We're going to use it on other things. And so ICE can do that too, but it doesn't mean that that folks have been granted a permanent status. And that's why it's important that we're perpetually organizing too. And I see that a couple people have their hands raised, so feel free to drop your question in the chat or your comment, but I am going to keep us moving because I want to make sure that Baromita has a chance to fill us in on exactly like who is considered a priority under this memo. Before we do that though, we did want to remind folks about how we got here, right? And so we know that these policies aren't going to be permanent. We can push for them to get better, and the right can also and is also pushing to make them worse, right? So in the first 100 days of Biden, our movement came together, organized 30 forums under the Eyes on ICE Truth and Accountability. Let's go back. Truth and Accountability tactic, right, where people were sharing exactly what the impacts of ICE have been, not only under the Trump administration, but also under Biden and Obama as well, right? People talking about what it looked like when somebody who has an aggravated felony conviction was being arrested and the impact on them and their family, or what it looks like for your aunt to be arrested because of quote unquote gang affiliation, right? And to have to fight to free her. Lots of different stories that were shared, 78 different organizations that participated, that finally resulted in 3 meetings with the administration. So 2 meetings with ICE Chief of Staff Tim Perry and a meeting directly with Alejandro Mayorkas and different organizations that participated in Eyes on ICE, so that folks like Quique Baltazar could talk, for instance, directly about his experience of having been arrested as a leader for the Milk with Dignity campaign in Vermont. Him and 39 other worker leaders at his organization who were retaliated against by ICE, and who I think, you know, are the direct reason why we have some of the wins that we are seeing now in the current PD memo. So we can go to the next slide. And I also just want to acknowledge, right, that this fight goes way beyond the first 100 days of Biden. There are folks on this call who have been fighting this fight for decades, right? And I think that we need to tip our hat to folks like Maru, to folks like Ade, to folks like Ale, who have been in this fight, who are going to continue to be in this fight. This is a little GIF that I found online of folks at the Congreso de Jornaleros, which is where I was fighting personally for 5 years in New Orleans. And we also know that we're being shaped by attacks from the right as well. So I just wanted to acknowledge that a month before the PD memo came out in August, a Trump-appointed judge named Judge Tipton had a decision in Texas that was really awful. It basically attacked the idea of discretion altogether, right? And it said that basically everyone who's undocumented has to be considered a priority for deportation, the way that they were under Trump. It said specifically that people who have certain criminal charges that are considered mandatory detention, and that people who have removal orders or deportation orders, also like specifically, like there cannot be like, you know, not targeting them. And so we were really, really concerned about that. You know, for that to come out, for that decision to come out just a few weeks before the PD memo was actually released, was a direct attack from the right. It was pressure on the Biden administration to try and shape their PD policies. And so we're going to hear from Palomita now. We ended up somewhere in the middle, shaped by those 2 realities, shaped by the strength of our movements, but also the attacks from the right. And now we're going to talk about who is actually considered a priority for removal under this memo. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Chloe. Just want to put a deep appreciation to Mi Gente members and to so many organizers on this call. You guys have been really holding it down for so many years, and it has really been an honor to be fighting some cases with you along the way. You guys have been amazing, so thank you. I am going to leap right into this. So the PD memo, as Chloe set out, prosecutorial discretion, I might use this word, PD. And the PD memo, again, is really just a decision, right, that law enforcement will take. And it's really going to be DHS, ICE, Customs and Border Patrol, even USCIS, the agency that takes and makes decisions, right, on your immigration case. All those agencies within DHS can decide how they're going to exercise prosecutorial discretion. But this one, we're just talking about ICE enforcement, but just want to keep in mind that we have 3 agencies that are all involved in enforcement in one way or another, and we can use all 3 of these sub-agencies to make moves. So there are 3 categories, again, for people who are enforcement targets. One is national security threats. These are people who ICE suspects are engaging in terrorism, spying, related activities. You know, this really happened a lot after 9/11 and for a long time afterwards, where there were these accusations of people being affiliated with terrorism in some way. And so that's a category that they have always had in every enforcement priority memo. The second is the one that I think has done so much damage to our communities, which is individuals who, a public safety threat. So individuals who are considered to be a current threat to public safety. And the thing that the memo says here is that it's a current threat, typically because of serious criminal conduct. That's a little different than what's said before. So it says, it doesn't say what serious criminal conduct is, but it does say you have to be a current threat. After that, it doesn't really designate any categories of crimes that make you a current threat. All it does with this memo, and we'll get into it later, is it sets out a bunch of factors that you can use, that they can use really, and that we can use to determine whether, you know, a person as a current will be considered to be a public safety threat. And the last category is a border security threat. And those are people, it's really clear, anybody who came after November 1st, 2020 is going to be considered a border security enforcement priority. Those people are going to be picked up. So next slide. So I kind of went through this already. Oh yeah, let me just, so the people suspected of terrorism, let me tell you what I've heard and what I've seen in the past. It's people who actually have maybe connections with people who are considered to be affiliated with a terrorist group. And they have a list of that actually on some Department of State websites. But spying related activities is something I have not seen. Someone who poses a danger to national security is really a judgment call that DHS is going to make. We can go to the next slide. So this is the one that I think we can get into later. People who are a current threat to public safety, again, because of serious criminal conduct. So in the past, we have seen something even broader, like people who are just a public safety threat. Now they've kind of closed this description. They've made it smaller, and they've said that it's a current threat to public safety. But typically, that means most of the time because of serious criminal conduct. And the next one. What does that mean? Yeah, I mean, this is what it can mean. So in the past, when you looked at serious criminal conduct, I would think, and most of us would think of, do you have an aggravated felony? Have you committed a crime that is considered to be dangerous, like assault and battery or domestic violence offense? Those are all the things that would kind of like come up in my mind. In the past, DHS used to say driving under the influence was a public safety threat. But these are the factors that they have now. They're going to ask you to look at these things to decide whether you're a public safety threat. They're going to say, how serious is the offense? And they're going to look at the sentence for which the person was convicted for. So they may say, if you have a suspended sentence of 1 year, or if you've served time, those are the things that they're going to look at. They're going to look at probably what kind of crime it is. Like, was somebody hurt? Was property really damaged? Was somebody injured? That's what they mean by the nature and degree of harm caused by the criminal offense. They could also look at money damage, like if something was stolen, how much money was involved. That's what we think of when we talk about nature and degree of harm. The sophistication of the criminal offense. This one is new. I haven't seen this one before. But typically what it means is that they're looking for crimes where there's planning, right? So that could be something where it's a planned robbery or a planned burglary, where somebody, wasn't it a crime of passion or impulse. They're going to look to see whether there is any planning involved. And then they will see whether there was a firearm or a dangerous weapon, a knife, any other kind of factor. And they could look, obviously, whether you have a serious prior criminal record. What does that mean? I don't know what that means. That feels like a big bucket of a category. But a serious prior criminal record is really at the discretion of the agency. That means that they can decide what is serious. And that could mean that, for example, what is serious could change from place to place. What is serious in Texas may not be serious in Arizona, may not be serious in New York or Texas. And so I think what we're going to find over time is what the agency thinks is serious prior criminal records. Next slide. So these are the positive factors, and the way that, you know, I like to look at this is like we kind of had to look at it as a scale. So all the things we looked about are the things that kind of drag us down. These are the things that we have to like highlight and look and ask people about to make sure we can make the case that someone is deserving of prosecutorial discretion. So you have to ask questions about how old were you when this happened? Were you young when this happened? Those are some of the questions, like advanced or tender age. Tender means young, youngish, you know, and that would be one thing that you could look at. How long you've been in the United States. That is something that's very common. Have you been here for 1 year, 2 years, 15 years? That's another. I also think whether there was a I think whether you had mental illness, whether you were not maybe in your right mind, whether you have something that got in the way that maybe led to the conditions that cause those crimes. There's a lot of trauma in our communities. And therefore, I think it's really viable that there's a lot of harm that comes out of our communities and could contribute to the crimes that we see today. A mental condition requiring care or treatment. These are all things that relate to people who may not have control over themselves. And then the last one is something that's covered in other PD memos, is whether you're a victim of a crime, whether you're a witness or a party in legal proceedings. And what that means typically is when they look at that, they're looking to see whether maybe you filed a civil rights complaint, whether you're objecting or protesting or being active in some way to talk about an abuse that happened as a result of your activism or just living in the United States. Maybe you actually were a victim of a hate crime of domestic violence, but you also could be in a legal proceeding or any kind of legal proceeding where you are saying that you have a civil rights violation that has occurred. Next slide. So the other kinds of factors that are here are, you know, what is the impact on family, whether you might have relief. These are all other things, like whether you might be eligible for a green card, whether you had military service, whether you've been rehabilitated. This is a question that often comes up. That means like, you know, did you try to make amends? Did you pay your fine? Did you go to all the anger management classes that you went to? You know, are other people going to come and say, really, this person has truly rehabilitated since they committed that offense? Or whether, lastly, the conviction was vacated or expunged. What does that mean? When you are convicted, you might get a sentence. If you get the sentence, that means you can try to get rid of that conviction, and those are very technical words. This word is called vacated. Another way that you might be able to get rid of it is for it to be expunged. These are all legal processes in your state where you can try to kind of erase the conviction off your record. Border security threat, again, this is something, again, which we've already spelled out, where someone entered after November 1st, 2020. Next slide. So a couple of things that are new in this memo and is that organizing for the first time could be a positive mitigating factor. That means simply a positive factor. And what we want to think about is that even if you fit within the priority, you might be able to argue that if you were swept into deportation or detention, but that you were involved in some kind of dispute and you're trying to defend your rights, then therefore that could be considered a positive factor. Go ahead. So I think there's a couple of things that are really important to take away from this memo, and I think this is actually really critical. I've been looking at these memos for 15 years, and I think these takeaways are important to remember, which is really number one, kind of like for the first time, we're not seeing a categorical bar for criminal history. And what do I mean by that? Is that there's no bar for what used to be a crime for an aggravated felony. There's no bar for something called a crime of moral turpitude. There is no explicit bar for driving while intoxicated or being a gang member. Those used to be bars that showed up in other memos. There are no categorical bars like that. Is it squishy? Is it unclear, like what it means to be a current public safety threat? Yes, but there's an opportunity now to organize, because now we don't have like this clear bar that says you are excluded from PD. And that's a really important point. So like, while this is a disappointment that these factors are vague and they can sweep in a lot of things, it's really important to remember that there are no categorical bars, and it's up to us to make the case that actually, like, even if you do have an aggravated felony, even if somebody calls you a gang member, even if they say that you've been convicted of certain crimes, that you can use other factors and say, I'm going to tip the scale and make sure that I'm eligible for prosecutorial discretion. The other takeaway is that for the first time, it's been a long time, a deportation order by itself doesn't make you a priority. That's different, right? And, you know, I think what's been really helpful is that always was a priority under the Obama administration and other administrations, like when I used to do this in 2005, 2006. But right now, it is not by itself a bar to prosecutorial discretion. And so that means people who have final orders of removal, final orders of deportation, they may not be considered a priority unless, right, they came in after November 1st, 2020, and they got an order of deportation after that. People after that date, you got to be very careful, right, about whether you want to start a campaign. But like other folks, you know, I think it's worth investigating. And lastly, I would just want to make this last push, that for the first time, and this is like a testament to all the work that's been done on this, that organizers and activists, their work, their involvement can finally be seen as a positive factor in whether you can request PD. And that is really, really a really, really amazing thing that it came out of the memo. Does it give you automatically like a grant of PD? No, but it can be used for your benefit. That's all I got.
Thank you, Palomita. So we're gonna keep going along. And we wanna share with you all now the link to the Deportation Defense Toolkit. I don't know, Chris, if you're able to just share that here in the chat. But we are gonna have this toolkit in English and Spanish. The translation to Spanish is almost done. So both of these are going to be launched online tomorrow, but we're giving you guys a sneak peek now here. And what this toolkit has is an overview of everything that Palomita just went over. So if you weren't taking notes fast enough, don't worry, we got you. It's in the toolkit. But it also has a lot more to help folks actually fight anti-deportation campaigns and deportation defense campaigns, right? Just like Palomita said, we know that where there are wins in this memo, it's actually not a win if that win is just on paper, right? Like a win on paper is very different from a win in our communities, a win that actually empties out a detention center, or a win at the border. And so the way that we actually monitor how these policies are being followed, or if they're not on the ground, is by looking at the cases that are actually ongoing in this moment, right? Like, are people actually able to get out of detention when this goes through on November 27th? Or are folks going to continue to be detained because things are too vaguely defined, the way that Palomita also mentioned, right? And we also know that this memo is not perfect by any means, right? Like the fact that the Biden administration is continuing to say that anyone who entered after November 1st, 2020, even after the outcry of, you know, rage that happened after, you know, the viral images of abuse at the border of Haitian migrants, like it just shows how dedicated they are to actually doubling down on xenophobia at the border rather than actually doing the right thing. And so we also need to continue to push through fighting deportation defense campaigns to reshape this memo into something that can actually protect more and more folks, right? There was also a question in the chat about how do we know like who makes the final decision on whether somebody gets discretion or not. So that's a part of this toolkit too. In the toolkit, you're going to see that there's a whole appendix that talks about different situations. I wonder, okay, I was going to try and share my screen, but I can't do that. But there's an appendix, like a chart called What Interventions Are Possible, Picking Your Demands and Targets, right? And it shows you like in a different situation, who's the decision maker, what should the demands for the campaign be, right? And so if your situation is that a person is set to go in front of an immigration judge or the Board of Immigration Appeals, right, then you're going to have a different target than the person who maybe is being prosecuted in federal prison for illegal reentry. So there's an intake in the toolkit that, you know, includes a ton of questions to help base organizations be able to get the information that they need to be able to fight these campaigns. There's a sample prosecutorial discretion request provided by Just Futures Law to actually allow folks to be able to submit those PD requests. There's template letters of support from friends, family, faith leaders, congressional offices. Oh, I'm being told that I can screen share now, so I'm just going to share this really quick. No, I still can't screen share cookies because I'm a participant. Anyways, we'll figure this out, but you guys have the link in front of you too. And yeah, I think that also to answer the other part of your question, right, about who ultimately decides who gets discretion, like part of that is like, okay, the target that we're going to see in that appendix like chart, if you go to what interventions are possible up there. Okay, I don't know who's controlling the screen, but I'm just going to talk over them. The other part of that is us, right? Like ICE is not going to decide to free people just because they want to. ICE is going to decide to free people because y'all are making the Biden administration look bad. Y'all are making the Biden administration look like Trump, which their actions are very Trump-like in a lot of cases, right? And so the only way to actually decide who's going to get discretion or not is through making these abuses public, through exposing them, through organizing, through petitions, and through civil disobediences. And the toolkit also contains descriptions of all of that with some examples from the different hub groups